Obviously, like, definitely not the Milan system right now is like Nancy right now has to 11, it's like 11 can like contact the Barbara, like everything right now, so definitely for like the contact not being affected right now. The case Barbara is definitely the scenario that I'm defining. And Nancy, obviously, I'm definitely thinking like would be like probably the spread because like unlike in Will's case, like even after like Will getting trapped into like the parallel world, like even while there was like multiple contacts from Will's side uh, to like Will's mother was referred. Hence, it's like Mike as well as like his friends had heard of the radio of like this because when speaking to that Will's mother and all that. And since like there was like multiple contacts from Will, but in the case of Barbara, ever since Barbara getting affected, ever since like Barbara getting affected and taken to the battle world, since there was like absolutely no contact at all from Barbara towards like anyone feel like very good. I'm also different definitely Nancy would feel that extremely worried, like, especially because like I'm referring like while exchanging all this information between like Nancy, Jonathan and Hopper's group as well as like uh Will's mother, like Joyce as well as like Mike Musson and the group like literally while exchanging this information like I'm referring Nancy might have desperately and frantically asked for incentives in one of the 20, but even as if like basically they had like any contact from Barbara, even though Barbara is like not friends with them, like still I'm really putting and doing like so desperate to that as to get would be that contact of like the possibility like because of like Barbara, the body that Barbara and we have done like the so and the thing Nancy would have asked them all that, but never would have but like Nancy would be like so really desperate to like find out if like Nancy would be desperate to like have it got like evidence at least if it's like a voice to find out if like Barbara is still alive or she's so like I'm considering right now for like 11 right with like 11 right now trying to communicate and make connection with like Barbara from West Parallel world like I'm considering like right now like the connection attempt not being a person like the scenario that I'm looking and like I was like for like the reason to be like either for uh I'm going to leaning more towards to that like Barbara would be right now Barbara might have like ran away from like the monster after like running away from like the monster might have caught up to like Barbara multiple times and so like Barbara might have barely get time eventually like Barbara might have for extremely exhausted and like Barbara might have while hiding somewhere like Barbara might have also like on the extreme of person might have felt unconscious. It's definitely one of the impression. So like due to this reason, I'm anticipating that 11 right now not being able to like maintain connection with like Barbara, like the scenario that I'm anticipating. That's like one possibility that I'm looking. The other possibility for like lately 11 maybe due to like right now having like I think like having used 11 like having used a superpower in like close frequency, the repetitive manner like multiple times like I'm able to do so that like 11 might be element itself might be that fairly exhausted that basically right now 11 maybe for like 11 not doing like this stuff contact maintaining contact like traveling connection and specific power like 11 right now due to that extreme exhaustion like not being able to like use that power to its like through extent and maybe due to that like 11 not being able to like, make contact with that Barbara. It's like other possible scenario that I'm looking at. So like so like this is like the scenario that I'm looking at right now. Like I'm definitely putting like we don't try to like make contact with like Barbara and also bring like it's not being a sort of like the contact not being possible and basically that's creating like an even more of like a worry and fear within Nancy right now as for like the possibility of like Barbara having having taken some life by the most of like certainly that's fear that is increasing within that corner right now with that's the scenarios that are available and even 11 and like would be not having like the clarity right now as for like the possibility of that whether Barbara is alive like the battle word of now it's like the scenario that I was putting in so like I was like it's taking a while before like but still while Nancy will be in like the real world and still like the next time that 11 would be like trying to like maintain like even without like 11 would be totally able to like real that extreme worry in like Nancy face as well as like 11, especially with like 11 with telepathic power, which 11 would be having. Like 11 would be able to like raise Nancy's mind and memories and basically to be able to like understand that extreme empathy from Nancy's side and like extreme worry for like and get feeling that Nancy would be having like all this like 11 would be able to like read right now. So like I'm going to bring like 11 at a later point like without even maybe while Nancy might not be there like or like while Nancy will be around you have to like 11 maybe at that point also like on the business even without Nancy asking 11 to like once again attempt to like to see if like she can make contact with like about one like even without Nancy asking like I'm going to bring 11 at that later point by herself trying to like establish contact with like Barbara, and that being a success the next time, the second time that will be attending the scenario that impossible. Something in my question, and at that point, like that would be that absolute surprise of the show for like Nancy. As like at by then, like Nancy will be totally losing hope that like the possibility of that Barbara having survived. So in like the battle world, so that being like an absolute surprise of a show where like I was going like maintaining contacts by herself and basically all of a sudden like hearing Barbara's voice playing like the radio phone at that point in like the future is like the scenario that I'm just talking and not with the impression. So like definitely right now I'm just different like 11 won't be able to like connect to Barbara right now. Like scenario that I'm sitting on another brain. Okay, so like that's the real question right now with like 11 right now in like Will's home like 11 right now looking at like the and like Will's home like the middle of the traditions where like right now 11 inspired by Naxal like would be like trying to like communicate would be like desperately trying to like communicate because like 11 desperately right now would be like desperately wanting to be of help for like for all these like people who like 11 right now would be like genuinely believing are like those but on the opposite of like brother and are genuinely good people so like 11 for like the first time to like 11 having having found so many good people in our life like that we 11 would be like right now afraid to like help all of them and basically 11 right now was run by herself like without anyone realizing like 11 right now totally using like that stuff in that will soap to like trying to like once again establish contact with like trying to like make communicate into like the parallel world to towards like Bogwell as well as Papa right now is like the scenario that I was looking. So definitely right now like the scenario that I was looking is like through the back step like 11 once again going to into like that dark void was like a dimension which would be like I'm also from like was like that dark space in which like 11 had this seen that monster here that I was for like and even get into that monster like that dark void of a space would be like about for like the intermediate kind of like a dimension the middle area like that intermediate dark void of the space between like the real world and like the parallel world might have been that might be like that task void of electricity that never was been. So like from there, like I was in time like you know through that bathtub in like the zone like once again going there and there like I was like for 11 to the friendly right now see both Will as well as Barbara. So like I was like seeing both Will as well as Barbara safe like I'm going like like at that point like 11 would be totally glad so like I'm right as like this 11 I'm considering at that point deciding to like go up to Barbara and trying to like communicate to Barbara but like right before like 11 would be able to like go up to Barbara in that dark void like I was seeing like that monster showing up and basically it would be like basically in like the parallel world like on the different like the scenario basically like Barbara would be like hiding somewhere that like so like right there like the monster like Selfless and will be trying to like working out towards like Barbara, trying to like communicate to Barbara, like even before like Barbara seeing 11 or hearing the 11th voice in like the last word area, like and like even before that like the monster showing up and basically Barbara running away is like the scenario that I've been. So at that point, I was suffering like the monster once again, noticing 11. And basically, at that point, I was suffering like the monster like communicating with 11 is like the scenario that I was looking. And at that point, I was sort of like, what like the monster would be telling 11 would be like, I was suffering that most likely that like, that the monster wants 11 to like come to Earth come towards like the monster in like the parallel world. That along such lines like the monster communicating with like even at that point the scenario that I was bringing and at that point on top of like the extreme social like that dialogue from like the monster like giving that communication from like the monster like that thing that the monster will be saying to Eleven so that show up to like the barrel but towards like the monster like that as well as was totally scaring 11 and on top of that totally bad like from the 11 like or just like I was causing 11 to start totally go unconscious in like the that was like the scenario that I was referring so like at that point I was referring like 11 totally drowning to school like I was referring like and absolutely no one would be that in like when someone would be that fighting out about it so like I was referring like 11 would be about to would be drowning as you know as like 11 would be about to die like I'm referring like Mike totally like checking up on 11 already because of like Mike totally would be like the only person who would be like that even more than the others would be like worried for like 11 especially with like 11 currently in like a bad day of state like I was like Mike deciding to like by then check up on 11 because like 11 might have by then like a lot of time would have taken up and 11 still might have not taken. So like I was going to be most likely the going to be Mike that would be like deciding to like check up on 11. So like I was going like with like Mike not hearing any response from 11 like I was going like Mike like shouting out to like all of them that basically something's wrong. I think like something that he thinks that basically something is wrong is like basically Mike trying to like break down the door is like the scenario that happened, right? So like at that point definitely not being possible for Mike and they just straight away hop rushing in and basically hop breaking down the door and basically like at that point I'm going to like them shockingly seeing like Gillivan like almost about to die in like the past in that bus that is like the scenario that I was using. So like hop up quickly rushing in and hop up saving 11 is like the scenario that I'm going to protect and I think the impression. And definitely my good impression is for like at that point like I'm removing like all of them like in like in home right now like basically not just Mike but like Dustin Jacob as well as like Joyce like Vince mother Joyce as well as like Hopper as well as Nancy as well as Johnson at that point like they would be like truly that getting that what kind of like person that 11 is like how dedicated and how desperate 11 is to like help them out like how it's how much of a like extremely empathetic, giving and selfless person like 11 is like basically it's not the truly realizing that at that point is like the introduction as I'm also talking about the framework. So like the thing is also I mentioned right now was like the phone at like the professor class from the teacher class from that the same teacher of like talking school like I'm going to bring like phone ringing right now I'm going to bring it to definitely proper and I'm going to bring like for like the scenario to not see like basically class still being kept in like the dark about like the about 11 and like the dimension and will being trapped in like the parallel world and all that. Like I'm just bringing right now to be like the point where like in the already formed team of like the Athletics home right now was like the team of like Nancy Jonathan joining up with like the team of like Hopper and with like Joyce as well as like the team of 11 and Mike Lopez and something like I'm wondering like in that team like the newest member would be like definitely Professor Clark is like the scenario that I'm looking at, especially because of like how much like Hopper knows that how badly Clark wanted to like find Will and basically how much that Professor Clark loved Will and basically and how badly Professor Clark wanted to find Will and on top of that like the fact that like Professor Clark like exceptional knowledge, superior knowledge in like science would be totally coming in handy for them in their quest to like find this and all like even though they have 11 like still Professor Clark like superior scientific knowledge and all that like would be totally being extremely crucial and helpful for them in their journey to like find and save Barbara as well. Would be along the lines like pop-up would be the only thing. So like I was going to be like most likely right now the phone call would be definitely pop-up. And I was going to be according to like pop-up president and the different like right now Professor Clark, which is the teacher Clark, science teacher Clark being like 20th member of like the team. And basically I'm considering right now it is like Hopper just through that phone call Hopper would be like most likely telling class to like basically to ASAP for him to like show to like Will's home. It's like the scenario. that I was like, rather than like hop around Mike Lucas or Dustin just like throw the phone and like just casually asking like some casually and simply asking some doubt science related doubt to that particular class. That's not the scenario that I'm developing. While keeping class in like the dark is not the scenario that I'm developing. And also like class being uh, phones most likely by opponent being told to like sort of like moment. They are like I'm beginning like then there of like the reveal of 11 and like battle world and everything happening. Of the reveal happening for class to opponent or the language class that way being like the newest member of the team, like the scenario that I'm going to bring another with even at that point, I was super maybe it's like a scenario with since like through like the scenario deprivation like 11 will be like not just talk but like actually see them like I was going like the work would have like 11 actually while 11 I was definitely being able to talk and see and talk and communicate in that dark void area with like Phil and something like in the case of like Barbara and something like most likely 11 at that point finding Barbara in like an unconscious kind of like a state so like I was like a Barbara might have been saved by like remote friends Barbara even though she might have been able to like successfully hide like at that point of like communication at that point like Barbara might have been like extremely like tired and like sleepy state or like an unconscious kind of state. That's like the scenario that I'm looking at. So that way like communication not being possible in the case of Barbara at that point for 11 is like also like the scenario that I'm looking at. So definitely, even though with like Clark's help with how on was different, like eventually Clark actually showing up and basically becoming a team member, like it was only at that point that I was different. Like even at that point, I was different, like it would take a lot of days for them to be able to like create that ultimate perfect, take all the equipment to like create like the ultimate perfect like sensory deprivation triangles, definitely and then make their contact to like build. It's definitely my good so 11 through the last word is like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like I'm looking like those days definitely all those days like I'm going like Clark will be staying at Will's home. It's also like the scenario that I'm portraying. Definitely even for Clark, I especially since saving Will was like extremely important to him. Like I was is in fact extremely important to him because he likes Will so much. And then the like definitely him as well deciding to like not go to go to school making from that point on of like him supposed to make the entry into like Will's home like I was like Clark as well staying at Will's home and deciding to like not leave until he makes so he creates like the sensory deprivation tank and like establish through 11 they are able to like establish like separately with essentially like Clark definitely even to that point would be the only thing that basically Will had actually died like definitely Clark would be like extremely won't be able to like contain that just like absolute desire to like hear Will's voice, definitely one of the reasons that like I'm losing class and not leaving to heading back to school at all and staying there exactly at this home until like the communication is like established with like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like I'm looking for like after like the recent like disappearance of which we just through like the town of Hawkins about like the disappearance of Nancy, as well as like Mike Lucas and Dustin. Like I'm bringing the next disappearance will be like the disappearance of like Clark. It's like the scenario that I'm looking on to bring another different. So like the clear of the impression is that when Clark's phone and talks to like the parents of like Mike Lucas and Dustin, at that point like I was trying Clark to like only find out that they have not that Mike Lucas and Dustin have had left home and basically had not returned and all this happening like even before basically Dustin has basically phoned and asked Professor Clark about like the sensory deprivation time would be like that absolute shocking realization that Clark would be having at that point. So like at that point I'm also like feeling like Clark was even more suspicious and feeling even more off for like Clark that I'm looking at that point I'm looking at Clark. So like at that point, I'm just thing for like class receiving like most likely another call from like lesson, and I was like class receiving a bunch of calls more and more from nothing, and I was saying it was definitely because of like especially with, like the sensory deprivation tank in of the laboratory was like built by scientists with like all the right equipment and everything. I was saying definitely with Mike Lucas and Dustin and like Hopper and all of them like with their attempt to like build their own sensory deprivation and like situations like it's just lives home and it's not even a laboratory and basically it's not scientists that like building trying to build the sensory deprivation plant at like lives home. I was doing basically sort of all like there will be definitely there will be all that wires and everything, all that equipment that containing all the wires and everything that would be required for like 11 to since it was required for like 11 to be able to like communicate that into like the parallel world and the back in like for another energy lab. So like I was going to create all that like I was going to definitely something would be like making a lot of calls to like class class with like the scenario that I was so like I was going to use all these phone calls happening precisely while class would be like realizing and fully aware that basically Michael Lucas and all of them are totally missing basically with the families, neither the families nor like the police knowing the about like the whereabouts. So like Clark at that point will be well and fully aware that basically like he's like the only person that right now is able to like talk to or like communicate with like the Dustin right now. Would be around the lines of like a realization that like Clark at that point will be happening. And I'm also point that Clark would be also confident that this is like it's not just Dustin that's like nothing that have gone missing, but like Mike as well as Lucas as well have gone missing. Like definitely they would be definitely just like Dustin would be around the line like like Clark would be singing. And like with like Mike's sister as well gone missing like I was like class was different that and for different that class will be only learning about that once that class will be calling like Michael's family, Michael's parents and asking for like his Michael's in his home, the community center. So like that way like class is already having a feeling that most likely they will all be together, like the scenarios that are bring us. And that like class even after them going missing, like class is like the only person that has that they are that can even talk to them. That's the only person that they are even calling in definitely member brain pressure. So like class totally would be feeling confused. Yet like I'm whispering through that. Yet like I'm looking like even while class using the term strategy because like I'm looking like class we're totally feeling as like maybe something's wrong, something that could be like maybe some sort of a trouble with like the kids and basically class would be definitely wanting to like find and save them. So like I was doing like class only through each of like the remaining like phone calls from Dustin, which I was looking to happen, asking Clark about like all the doubts about related to like the sensory to the creation of the sensory deprivation, like while during that phone call, like I'm just wondering like Clark steadily trying to like get any sort of information as to like possibly where like person and all of their whereabouts will be like the scenario that I was saying. So like through that phone call I'm just wondering like Dustin like through that interaction like making some sort of like a mistake at some point, which would be giving Clark kind of like an idea as to like where they would all be like that they would all be most likely at Will's home. Clark that way figuring out reflecting the scenario that I was looking and then and Dustin won't be like and neither Dustin or like the others won't be like realizing that basically that class would might class of taking of like them or being elected from like the scenario that I'm looking and that way like I was gonna like eventually class only stealthily showing up outside of Will's home. And at that point I'm possible like what class but like this class not ringing like the door but like class like as he would be like standing outside like the door like I'm possible in like class maybe like stealthily trying to listen so for that way, I was very impressed that that episode participation like totally stealthily sneaking up to like on the outside of Will's home and there like I was from like class that the first voice that class would be shockingly hearing would be that of Dustin's like the scenario that I was doing. And like I was doing like through that dialogue that like and then class hearing like the voice of like Mike and Lucas and basically the voice of Pop and all that like and I was wondering the interaction or the dialogue that like Clark was stealthily hearing from outside like I was like Clark hearing chocolate hearing them talking about Will what is like communicate with Will and all that like so Clark would be totally totally confused so like I was in Clark at that point only peeking through like stealthily peeking through like the window and I was like definitely I was like they would have only forgotten to like at the floor of the window of like the close the curtain. Like the scenario that I was doing. So like Clark totally seeing through the window and Clark totally shockingly seeing like a huge fan within like the home of like building and basically like Clark also shockingly saying that not only Mike Nichols and Dustin, but Hopper as well as like Nancy and Jonathan and all of them would like the scenario that ended with the ring. So at that point, I was like Clark totally listening to like their interaction and like Clark totally being confused with like them talking about like what Clark would be like totally simply as he would be reaching like Clark totally hear also only hearing like them all talking about like wanting to like, communicate with like Will and like Clark also seeing just like there as well like which like Clark would be like not recognizing like 11 as like 11 or definitely also able to remember Clark not being able to recognize that so Clark like seriously confused as to like who that was. So like at that point I was like Clark deciding to like totally find out the truth and I'm looking like Clark straight away going up to the front door and either ringing the doorbell or like knocking on the front door like the scenario that I'm in. So like right then it's confirmed like all of them, like Mike telling all of them to like keep quiet and be silent. Either Mike or Hopper telling them to like keep silent and basically all of them to quickly going silent and basically them telling Joyce like Bill's mother Joyce to like Bill's mother like to open the front door and basically like Bill's mother like opening the front door, seeing Clark and basically Joyce would be like doing her absolute best to like put on that absolute fake act and basically to that way to quickly have like Clark leave the home. It's like the scenario that I'm referring because like Joyce neither one of like them would be aware that of like Clark having heard all of their voices and even seen them through the window and all that. Like the scenario that I put. So like Joyce doing her absolute best to like basically send uh, to send class that away. But like I'm looking like that's not working out. But like Clark as well at that point would be totally putting on a fake act and if looking like Clark determined to like not leave and respect. So like I'm looking there being maybe like a minor struggle between like them and then like I'm looking Clark totally forcing his way into like Will form and they are like another different like Clark totally with like a smile like laugh totally looking at like and all of them like present there like Hopper and like Mike Lucas and Dustin like Nancy Jonathan and like even 11 and like the scenario that I'm looking at and this would be what like I'm looking like mapping that point where like Clark would be like becoming like the newest member of like the team that's like of like Hopper and crew like Mike and all of them like and Nancy and Jonathan and all of them to like basically that like that's probably something to like find with is definitely my brother and Clark being the newest member and from that point on and even during that time like all of them would be like until when Clark would be showing up to Will's home like and seeing all of them at that point I was afraid like all of them would be like totally struggling with like building the sensory deprivation kind of definitely deprivation because like they would definitely like without like the proper help of like Clark like they would be like having no chance of like being able to like perfectly build the sensory deprivation kind of like the scenario that about them. So they were just still struggling with like all of their attempts ending up being a failures like the scenario that I'm doing. So like I'm it would be classes entrance and into like the team as like a new member that will be like making it eventually making it possible for them to be able to like fit their ultimate sensory deprivation time and for them to through 11 to be able to like make contact to like win also at the flavor of the way I'm touching right now that like is me right now with like Dustin calling and asking Professor Clark about like the sensory deprivation sign like that as well as like the stealing of like sort from like Hawkins middle school as well. I'm definitely Hopper and Johnson right now what the numbers are definitely stealing exactly 1,500 pounds. Like the exact quantity that like definitely glass have stored like the step as for like the exact quantity of like sort that's like required for like the sensory deprivation time. It's definitely one of the remedies. So like this will be like so like definitely one of the impressions definitely that like these things like collectively these things collectively would be eventually leading to like Professor Clark ending up being like the newest member of like the team of like Hopper and Nancy, Jonathan, and like Mike and friends and 11 and this mother. It's definitely my concern. Like this would like these incidents would be eventually resulting in spiraling into Professor Clark ending up being part of their team and ending up staying in that with so it's like the scenario that I'm going to bring and as like how it will be happening I'm just going to bring it to be totally due to that I'm going to bring that definitely it's not going to like exactly like how Jonathan like being that I'm going to bring that definitely the scenario that's going to happen was like would be definitely not snowing and I'm also bring that school would be like once again starting and once like school starts itself was going to bring like what's the class like learning of that exactly 1,500 pounds of that sauce missing from school. So like at that point itself like I'm also bring like Clark would be instantly thinking of that phone call with like the she had told us thing about like 1% by and so but for like the time. But like I'm the still like even from and it would just be like and at that point like I'm the like Clark totally checking the class of Dustin and like finding out that like that day doesn't have not shown up to school. And at that point like I'm the class also noticing that basically Mike as well as Lucas as well have not shown on selection till that day. So like I'm just bring like then yet like I'm just bring the class will be only thing along the lines that they're just children like they won't be able to like steal and fight 1,500 pounds from like from school. So like yes like I'm just bring like something totally seriously feeling off for class. So it's like the scenario that I'm looking at, like choose something is off. So like I was bringing that class straight away was definitely spawning that the form of like Lucas as well as Dustin. And then microphone and like I'm just gonna like in that way finding out like also definitely one of the real question right now was like Jonathan and Hopper stealing all that sort from like Hopper's clinic school and right now was like Hopper telling like trying to the really trying to like convince Jonathan that only this is like fear for and it's like concern for like Jonathan's safety with like Hopper right now that's really trying to like convince Jonathan that like he will save will like but they were like, even though Jonathan would be genuinely convinced that Lily Hopper genuinely means what he says, like Dumbledore still, Jonathan won't be like willing to like take even like the slightest sort of at all when it comes to saving his brother. Then it's definitely on the train. So that like I'm going to make even with like Hopper saying all this, like I'm going to eventually Jonathan with I'm going to make it would be definitely first Dumbledore it would be Hopper that would be like entering through the three portal to like the bad word to say this is like the scenario that I'm looking at right before Hopper leaves. I'm definitely bringing like Hopper telling all of them that the very same thing once again, like which is like she just face like Hopper really with like we just face telling them that like she trying to convince them that like she will save Will, that they should all wait there at Will's home until she brings back Quick as well as Barbara. Would be along the lines Hopper would be like desperately trying to convince them and basically with like her serious face and like Hopper will be leaving to so like and the throws the three process. But like I'm some definitely like the remaining of them like basically Jonathan, Nancy, as well as like Mike Joseph and Dustin, as well as like Joyce, especially Joyce, all of them would be like won't be able to like contain would won't be able to like stop themselves from like going up from entering like from finding and entering like the portal and searching for the because especially because of like them having like done so much just to like save Will this entire time and without knowing where Will is. And right now with them finally having found out and realized that where exactly Will is, like they won't be able to like contain that their absolute desire to like basically save Will as well as Barbara Jonas husband that like like even though Hopper will be saying that and Hopper will be like himself only heading off to like Muscle for to end up through the portal and so the still like them not at all being able to like just simply wait there at like with so much and like Popper results like and the different like after Popper would be leaving like without much great delay but were like the others as well simply leaving like the scenario that I was doing and like the scenario that I was doing like after Popper leaving like I was doing like uh, Jonathan as well as Nancy as well as like Joyce telling like Mike Lucas and Dustin and 11 that like Amber still like Amber them even though 11 will be having all of us superpowers still Amber Super like by then like definitely Joyce as well as like Jonathan as well as Nancy will be like still seeing like 11 as like a child and basically they wouldn't want like 11 to get into any danger and by then like they would have Hopper and Joyce might have so Hopper and Joyce like they would all would have learned about like Sharia and how like 11 is actually Jane and how like her mother is still waiting. The situation is like her mother is in, and as for her mother still waiting even to the present day for like 11 to return and all that. That basically definitely is the last thing like Joyce, Nancy or Jonathan will be wanting would be to like, even though 11 has superpowers, will be to take 11 with them and put 11 in danger. So like I was super like so like them seeing 11 as like a child itself, and I'm super like precisely because of the reason I'm about to bring at after Hopper will be leaving, I'm about to bring like exactly like Hopper, how Hopper with like a serious face try to convince them to like not to patiently wait. Like I'm about to bring the same thing happening with like after Hopper leaving, I'm about to bring Jonathan, Nancy, as well as like Joyce like turning back towards like Mike, Lucas, Dustin, as well as 11, and telling them that basically that this is like a job for like the adults, like you are just you are all children, and you this is extremely a dangerous thing for you, and basically that your children need to like wait patiently at here while we will and can sure to like definitely bring back and save Will as well as Barbara, like Joyce, Nancy, and Jonathan trying to like convince Mike, Lucas, and Dustin, and like basically them leaving is like the scenario that I was going to bring. I'm going to bring like it would be like Joyce after like Hopper would be leaving, it would be like the team of like Joyce, Nancy, and Jonathan that would be heading off to like Marvel drops in like the middle of the night to basically enter into like the parallel world through the portal to that same will of like the scenario that I'm referring. So like that's like the scenario that I'm referring, and after like Nancy, Jonathan, as well as like Joyce would be leaving, I'm referring Mike is only looking to towards like each other, like Mike, Dustin, and as well as like Lucas looking at each other and basically then saying like what are we even waiting for when we along the line that they will be saying. So like after like Jonathan, Nancy, as well as like Joyce will be leaving, I'm definitely 11, as well as like Mike, Lucas, and Dustin also leaving Will's home, and basically like each of these three teams like following each other at a certain distance, like the scenario as they will be like going in deep into like another sports, like the scenario that I described. So like my good preparations are like for like the century the creation time will like finally be completed through like class help that's in this scenario that I'm doing. And once like the century the creation time would be completed, and basically once they would be like making contact with like will like I'm looking for like after that like through that contact like I'm looking like for like totally come talking to Will, and I'm looking like for only forming some sort of like a strategy like for precisely through Will like precisely exactly as a quick like the situation which like Will is at that point would be in like for like for like some through that communication like forming some sort of like a strategy with Will to sort of like save it. And I was instead like I was like hop to be like hopper. I was like maybe the initial team would be like the team of like hopper as well as clown. That would be deciding to like go to Murmur Forest, and basically Hopper would definitely be feeling that he would like need class of help will definitely be some kind scientific knowledge and the thing that might come in handy for uh, Hopper in like the parallel world about which like Hopper, someone who's like weekend times will be like having a hard time with like would be along the lines Hopper would be thinking. So Hopper would be understanding like the first team would be like team of like Hopper and Cloud that would be like heading over to like Mustard Forest and through end up through the portal through like the parallel world of like the scenario that everything. So like after like Hopper and Cloud would be heading over to like Mustard Forest, like so much delay I'm like Jonathan, Nancy, and like Jonathan Nancy and like joined like heading off or to like football, because like even after like that communication like even after once again hearing like Vince's voice, like simply Joyce won't be able to like to simply patiently wait there in like Vince's home until like for like Hopper and Blanche to like save and bring Will back, that like she won't be able to take that Rochette also. Neither would like Jonathan will be able to, and neither would like Nancy will be able to like wait for that. So like I'm bring them probably like sitting down with permission for like them telling like Michael to understand and even that like this is like a job for others, and them leaving just like the scenario that everything. And after government they like Michael to understand as well as 11 as well leaving up on that. So like on the different like around like during the interval time interval between 8 and 8:30 like I'm looking like while Hopper and team while all of them would be like searching in like Northwood for without realizing about like the other teams like that are following them like. the monster thinking like not the forest, so like as like individual teams, like the team of like Hopper and Clark, the team of like Joyce, Nancy and Jonathan, and like the team of like Mike Lucas and Weston and 11 is like the scenario that I'm going. They will be like individually something all of like Michael Fox, and I'm also like the first team that will be getting attacked by the monster, like, and I'm also the monster totally going up, and I'm also like the team of like Nancy Johnson and Joyce, like it's like Nancy and Johnson knowing like where that those two trees were like the monster had basically showed up, and basically those one tree were like the monster had shown up, and like that one other tree were like Nancy had escaped. Like I'm literally like that means Nancy and Johnson would be kind of having a rough idea of like where exactly the looks of like the monster, but like I'm that night like the monster showing up from like a totally different tree in like North Forest at a different location. So like that way the monster and definitely preparing to be like attacking. The first team that like the monster and preparing to be attacking would be precisely like the team of like Nancy, Jonathan, and Joyce is like the scenario that I'm putting. So like that way, like Jonathan struggling to like basically fight back the monster, but like I'm looking Jonathan getting into like secret struggle, and I'm wondering like the during this time, like I was thinking, like Hopper would be like hearing like Hopper scheme would be like the team that's again here. So like the Mercury Law cost would be specific huge definitely. So like Hopper team would be like the team that would be here. Right? So like Hopper really rushing in, hearing like all of the screams of like Jonathan and everything, and I was like Hopper trying to like save Jonathan, and like Hopper trying to like fight like Hopper using his weapon and Hopper trying to fight the monster, but like yet like I was the monster would be so in the so like I'm working with the monster slowly or pouring Hopper, and basically Hopper that way getting injured and like getting sidelined. It's like the scenario that I was Clark as well to be getting injured, and like then like I'm looking like Joyce as well getting attacked by the monster and like her getting injured, and then I was worrying the monster like about to attack Nancy. So like at that point like Nancy would be screaming, and like Jonathan won't be able to like do anything at all. Like Jonathan will be badly injured. So like hearing Nancy scream like at that point by then like I was wondering like Mike Lucas and Dustin who might have been at an even more far away because like after hearing the scream they would be like initial scream and like maybe they might be like rushing their way into like trying to get towards that locations definitely understated. But like precisely at the monster would be about to take Nancy's life like I was wondering like or like catch her and take Nancy like at that very last second I was wondering like Mike most likely the most unfortunate scenario to be like monster about to take Nancy's life, but like at that very last second like on the front like Mike totally showing up and Mike totally jumping in to that protect the system. But like I'm just like at that point, that way like monsters attack about to land on Mike, but like right themselves on the different like 11 using superpowers onto like the monster like the scenario that I'm working. That way 11 creating Mike once again like the scenario that I'm working. So like at that point I was super like the monster like seeing 11 like I'm the super like the monster once again like since in like the DarkVoid like the monster that so badly and desperate about to like communicate with 11. It would be that very exact most of that like that 11 would be that would be attacking them that might in like multiple forms. It's all the technical. So like seeing 11 like I was like even though 11 would be using its superpowers like a superpowers like still I'm like the monster force in its way into like basically still even bypassing the power of its the superpower and basically the monster was like they capturing 11 and the monster basically dragging 11 into like the portal into trees, like the scenarios that I'm looking in. That way, like the monster passing through like the into like the parallel world through like the parallel world with like 11 is like the scenario who would be like for 11 who would be like scared and screaming at that point like the scenario that I'm looking. And straight away that causing like Mike to like straight away run into the portal without a second thought, like Mike straight away running after 11 into that portal in that race, like the scenario that I'm looking that straight away with like Mike running like straight away, I'm looking like Lucas, Dustin, Lucas and Dustin straight away running after Mike is like the scenario, and then as well entering through the portal is like the scenario that I'm looking at. So like I'm looking like Johnson and also others would be like kind of like similar to like a certain extent. So like they only have to like quickly run after like them, but still I'm looking like them. And I'm looking by then like the portal as well being getting closer. The portal on that very specific tree getting close by then. It's like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like that way like Hopper and the others won't be able to like enter through the portal in that way. So like at that point, just I was looking like Nancy and Jonathan totally remembering like they are being exposed existing multiple portal and the positive like they are being like other portals in like other three within like that might still be open within like multiple forums like such lines like they live through their experience like basically Jonathan is actually thinking of such about it. So like I was like Jonathan saying that like proper and I was like Jonathan only finding a portal and basically like at that point like as well like it will be like Joyce, Jonathan and Nancy together for like them finding a portal and quickly like them entering through that portal into like the parallel world at that point. And like at that point it's like after them like I'm like proper as well as like that club, that teacher club. So them both would be like maybe like the most enjoyed at that point in the scenario that was. Them both that way like basically precisely being able to like understand like that exact process after like Jonathan Joyce as well as Nancy will be entering through that process like the scenario that was. And I was like totally shouting out to like Jonathan Nancy and Joyce to like not enter through that portal. It's too dangerous, but like I was saying them not listening to like Hopper and them entering through that portal. So like Hopper as well as like Clark shortly entering after that quickly. It's like the and right after like Clark would be entering like the portal would be in that other three as well would be closing like the scenario that I was in. That would be how like all of them will be like finally making it to the to be able to like into like the battle world like all of them entering like the battle like world in such an unreflective scenario that I'm also sorry and my Raymond and that way like I'm also like them having like even more of like a bigger task and that would be to like save on top of like them having to like save Barbara as well as like on top of them having to like save Barbara as well as like and well like them at that point also having to like find the monster and basically that took 11 and basically for them to like also save 11 at that point in like the parable and like that task like I'm also like the journey of like Hopper Joyce, like Clark, and Nancy and Jonathan and Mike, Lucas and Dustin. That beginning in like the parallel world without them having like any help from without like 11 by their side, like them like totally starting their journey and exploring like the parallel world is like the scenario that I'm going to roll it and I'm going to remember. Okay, so like definitely for the brain production right now with like pop up and basically Mike because understand like the entire thing like basically getting their own like sensory like deprivation time like getting ready quickly like and definitely just attempt would be definitely failure is like the scenarios that I'm noticing in the setup right now for 11 attempt to like communicate with them to end in a failure definitely and even though right now I'm considering even though right now, Will's mother, like Joe, like right now, is like talking to 11 in like an extremely affectionate and comforting manner, like basically, about the trying still for like Joy to like eventually these patients, like the scenario that I'm looking at. But the first thing, like for 11, like once again, like basically, everyone like totally putting that pressure into like 11 to like totally more and more expert, more and more without getting no proper rest, like her being proper that way, like in a way, kind of like in a way, even though they would all be like initially, um, preferring like that pressure to totally force 11 to like exert her more and more into like trying to communicate with Will and like each and every single time like the attempt to end up in a failure through their own version of like the sensory deprivation time. It's definitely not great. And the potential reason taking into my episode that the potential reason would be like for like would be due to like the sensory surveillance tank in like Brenner's laboratory being an advanced tank and I think like even when 11 had come made the communication from Brenner's laboratory like 11 had like kind of like an helmet with like helmet kind of like an equipment with wires and everything so precisely the lack of such an equipment and all that like I'm referring like totally affecting like 11's like ability to be able to make that successful communication with like into like the parallel world is like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like even though right now as Joyce is like totally talking to 11 in like a comforting manner, so that way like basically uh, even though like Joyce would totally mean everything she says, that basically she's totally grateful for everything 11 is doing, that 11 is like a praise on and everything like still. And the that desperation from those sides to like once again wanting to like talk to Phil to like find out that Bill is still all right and safe in like the parallel world. That desperation and possible like could eventually only cause like choice to like act out in like an insensitive and old manner towards like for 11. It's like the scenario that I'm observing just like the scenario that I'm observing, and this would be due to like each and every single time like that 11 would be like giving it her absolute best and trying to like communicate, still it ending up being a failure. And basically because of like the sensory deprivation times being far from perfect. It's like it could be due to that part alone, like you don't won't be able to like make that communication and like his mother like Joe's like totally losing patience and like her not being without being able to like understand that like without her being able to and her not being able to understand that 11 is like actually giving it her everything like I'm putting like her losing her patience and maybe like her also like shouting at like for 11. So like at that point, eventually it's like the scenario that I'm doing, and I'm definitely putting like the sensory deprivation, sensory deprivation time method to like make that communication to 11 right now. Within like will sound like that eventually I'm sitting to my preparation only finally becoming a success only once like it will be only finally becoming a success only once like class like the dates of class would be eventually ending up being like one of the next team member of like the entire flow of like offering to like entire team like basically of like Microsoft and all of them like it will be only one like eventually Clark ends up being part of that team which I'm still correcting like it will be only at that point through Clark of health that I'm looking they will be able to like create that kind of like maybe like kind of like the right kind of like sensory observation tank and like maybe with like survivors and all that. So like I'm wondering maybe like it will be Clark would be like the person that will be like only it will be like him creating all that and basically that way it will be only at that point that basically they will be able to make that successful communication with with Rook 11 is like the scenario that I'm delivering and at that point I'm delivering on that realization I'm delivering that with some other like joy like basically like she'd be feeling bad about that having shouted at like Rock 11 and basically feeling usually bad and guilty and I was referring her telling sorry to like 11 and please apologizing to like 11. Yeah, like I'm also like eventually still remember the impression that like once like eventually I'm also still 11 would be like once there will be something for like the bottle in like month was like at that point the blame would be like it would be 11 that would be getting captured by like the monster and getting dragged into like the barrel but straight away. But the other saving up at 11 and even at that point I was super like in a police joy feeling like even more guilty of like having like acted out in like an extremely insensitive and cold manner and having shouted at 11 for something that wasn't even 11's fault and like basically that extreme guilt being formed within like Joyce at that point even more. This is also like an example of scenario that I'm looking for this weekend of the record. Okay, so like the the Korean fiction right now it's not like the dead body Barbara that like everyone right now saw through like through the dark void through like the sensory deprivation and like I'm looking like that dead body won't be of like the actual Barbara is definitely one of them. It should be like the dead body of like the parallel world version of like Barbara. It's definitely one of the so like the actual real world Barbara who got affected and who got trapped in like the parallel world would still be alive. It's definitely my personal impression that I'm still thinking about that. I'm also still thinking to my personal impression that like the monster that basically even tries to like, communicate with 11 would be actually the parallel world version of like 11 who and like the according to like the parallel version of like runner this experiment on like 11 the parallel world version of 11 going around might have caused like 11 returning to that monster the parallel world version of 11 returning to that monster so like when whenever that monster feels like the real world 11 like it was it okay seeing its like actual true self even though that monster will be there they conscious like still possible like whenever that monster will be seeing 11 like it will be able to like see or like faintly recognize its like true self like how it looked before it had turned into like the monster. So it's definitely my best and that would be the first reason for like the monster having that desire to like communicate with like specifically 11. That's definitely my personal impression rather than for like that monster even trying to like attack 11 like that monster trying to like having that better interest towards like 11 and wanting to like communicate with like 11 even like the dark world area will be precisely due to this specific reason. It's definitely Michael Ramos. So like definitely Michael Ramos if that is speaking on this definitely that like Barbara will still be alive. It's definitely Michael Ramos. Okay, so like definitely Michael Ramos is for like why even while Eleven had searched for Barbara through like the sensory deprivation and through the dark void yet like I'm the according to my mother like it would be like the fan version of Barbara that like and not the actual Barbara that like Eleven might have seen like the body of like I'm looking at still the reason for like Eleven not being able to to be able to get connection to like the actual Barbara would be precisely because of like from like the exact location where like Eleven is in like the real world from that distance to like the distance in like the parallel world like basically the Barbara that's like the close distance even if the parallel world where Barbara is like still like her the version of Barbara that like at like the close distance might have been like the parallel world to where Eleven was trying to communicate might have been that body of the parallel world version of Barbara and this will be the reason for like Eleven potentially getting communicated and seeing that parallel version of Barbara's dead body instead of like the actual real Barbara who would be trapped in like the parallel world who would be like at an even greater distance deep within like the parallel world right now. Definitely one of the image. So like I was putting like right now, Eleven totally an extremely panicking manner and like an extremely depressed sad like feel like I'm looking like Eleven telling like Nancy right now that basically Barbara is no more like Barbara is gone, Barbara has died. It's like has died. It's like the scenario that I'm looking at. So like at that point I'm definitely putting like Jonathan as well as like Joyce being like so extremely worried for Bill. Especially with Barbara with them and they would be like straight away feeling that like at that point from Eleven that like Barbara is dead. So like they would be so extremely worried for like Bill. So like I'm also going Joyce as well as Johnson like quickly telling Eleven and pushing like Eleven who would have like already members by then like would be having like her nose bleed. So like John would be already far too exhausted. But like once again like I'm looking at that point itself like without giving Eleven a rest straight away due to that extreme depression and worry that would be like Johnson and even more than Johnson like Joyce would be having like I'm looking Joyce only forcing like Eleven to like quickly search for Will in like the parallel. So like I'm looking at that point like the scenario that I'm looking is for like even at that point I'm looking Eleven totally getting communicating and seeing that dark void like Eleven seeing like the dead body of Will and that as well I'm looking would be like the dead body of like the parallel version of Will is like the scenario that I'm looking and that way like after the communication like Eleven openly coming out of like, the communication and Eleven most likely in tears like telling Will's mother that Joyce as well as Joyce that basically that Will has died like that being like the ultimate shock for all of them but like I'm looking definitely I'm looking at that point for Joyce, like Joyce totally losing it at that point, and Joyce totally getting angry, and like Joyce totally refusing to believe that, and like Joyce, that very same Joyce who totally thoroughly comforted and like thanked uh, like um, 11 for like the things the help she was like doing for them, like that very same Joyce, like I'm looking like totally out of her desperation and her worry then we are like something Joy totally blaming and shouting at 11 and for 11 and once again like for 11 like once again getting misunderstood by everyone. It's like the scenario that I'm observing. But like I'm observing like 11 this time like the difference from the 11 itself would also be genuinely believing that like the dead body of like Barbara as well as like the dead body of Will at 11 would be most likely without much delay would be seen through the communication like that DarkVoid. It's like the actual dead body of like the actual Will as well as like the actual Barbara while in that quote and like the actuality of the situation and the suffering would be most likely like those two dead bodies being like those bodies of like the parallel version of like Barbara as well as well definitely remember everything about which like I'm like eventually 11 herself would be like finding out and I'm like for 11 by herself while everyone will be like blaming for 11 once again that basically like I'm not like them all blaming 11 and for like still blaming 11 for like basically 11 if 11 had used their powers like in more like 11 like I'm not them all blaming 11 and saying things along the lines of like if 11 had helped them better like basically they could have saved it along the lines like Basically, I'm considering most likely maybe like Mike Lucas and Dustin like blaming it. Definitely, I'm considering Mike Lucas and Dustin not blaming 11, but definitely Joyce might definitely will be like totally losing it, and I'm considering like Joyce totally blaming 11 and shouting at 11, and a lot of like those scenario that I'm considering for 11 crying, and I'm considering like while all of them would be like falling asleep, like would be sleeping, and I'm considering like 11 by herself, like once again trying to like communicate. Uh, Once again, like and using that sensory deprivation tank and basically once again while 11 would be once again simply like 11 as well would be not totally feeling like so that would be eventually ending up feeling as if refusing to believe, and once again I'm not saying without anyone realize while everybody else will be complete 11 by themselves once again trying out once again using the sensory deprivation time, and at that point 11 shockingly seeing Will alive in the DarkVoid, the scenario that I'm looking. And at that point is when considering 11 totally shockingly would be finding out that basically it wasn't the original Will, or it might not be the original Barbara, but it might be the parallel version of Will and Barbara, who's that body 11 might have seen in the DarkVoid will be along the lines 11 at that point will be figuring out. It's the eventual scenario that I'm looking for. And once 11 will be revealing this to Joyce and others. At that point, I was saying Joyce once again feeling bad about shouting at 11, and basically once again Joyce totally apologizing to 11 at that point. It's there's a scenario that I'm looking for again. Okay, so definitely not a very interesting right now with Joe's comforting 11 right now, and basically in the DarkVoid right now see 11 seeing CastleByers all of a sudden definitely my was very impressive that with CastleByers having that kind of a sheet covering it and I'm looking right now what 11 I'm looking right now what 11 would be moving that sheet in the front door of CastleByers what 11 would be totally seeing within, and the front would be most likely the dead body of Will. This is the scenario that I'm about to bring, and that as well, and the spring would be the body of the parallel version of Will is definitely my Pythagorean version. Uh, my Pythagorean version. So for the parallel version of Will's dead body, and if that's the scenario, then for the parallel version of Will's dead body to be in Castle by I'm going to might have been left there by the parallel version of Mike Lutham and Dustin, who might still be alive in the parallel world. Who still might somehow manage to stay alive in the parallel world. Is the scenario that I'm thinking. Maybe Will might have the parallel version of Will might have died while trying to protect them. So also about the things that I'm correct. So this is the scenario that I'm correct. So I'm personally or I'm also predicting for Mike Lucas and Dustin eventually they once they would be eventually the future they would be making their entry to the parallel world at that point through the process at that point after as they would be even exploring the parallel world finding the something to find well them eventually finding their own parallel world version even before finding the there's also a possibility that I'm also trying. So since if I talk to my birthday reference basically it's the dead body of the parallel version of Will that basically right now 11 would be finding one, 11 would be seeing what's inside CastleByers right now. If what's inside is the parallel version of Will's dead body, then I'm preferring it will be precisely placed there. His dead body might be precisely placed there out of their bond of friendship by the parallel version of Mike Lucas and Dustin. It's also by the parallel version of Mike Lucas and Dustin, especially my observation correction right now. So looking at the reimbursement right now, this Popper as well as Choice right now. With Popper deciding to once again infiltrate into runners in the laboratory I'm going to definitely putting Popper more confidence initially definitely to backfire definitely with everything. Especially because of since Popper the recent previous infiltration into runners in the laboratory going during that infiltration Popper being able to infiltrate to the point of even finding that gate. I think within Pranas and Nazil about it Hopper even being able to make it to that extent I'm also bring definitely I'm also bring since that incident Runner might have seen we tightened up the security in the Brennus and Avila, but lead to like even a great resistance, definitely will bring that like another this time as like Hopper. Along with the choice would be about like once again trying to like infiltrate into like Brennus laboratory and this time for like the moment Hopper will be like enter into like the energy laboratory building itself like another without much great delay at all. Like Hopper as well as Joyce would be getting captured by Brennus security team. It's definitely the scenario that I'm looking and then so like operational approach being taken to like an interrogation group where like on the screen this time like Pranav himself would be showing up along with like a bunch of his men like Pranav himself showing up to that interrogation room while Hopper as well as George will be in like an in like kind of like a state like handcuffed like kind of like a state like or like a kind of like a state that like the scenario that I'm remembering. And it would be at that point that basically like Joyce would be totally losing it and realize shockingly realizing that like being through villanistic extent of like a nature of like Pranav. Definitely will train So like whatever like Joyce totally losing it and Joyce totally shouting at like Pranav, no matter what Pranav is saying and then was from like runner like totally surfing pop up as order was mentioned and basically runner's men will be like surfing pop up and would be trying to like interrogate all of them like seriously surfing pop up and would be trying to interrogate hope and all that like in front of Joyce's like the scenario that I'm looking over something. Yet like I'm considering like pop up taking all that injuries and basically still remaining tight-lipped like runner and still like asking having a feeling as if like literally Moffat would be knowing where like 11 and 11 would be and basically that way like Brenner totally should be interrogating Hopper and basically Brenner's men like the helping Hopper like the Hopper Joseph like the scenario that I'm looking. So like Joseph will be witnessing like how much like how much like Hopper is like would be hurting and getting hurt and suffering yet like Hopper like determination to like save not only save Will but to protect all the kids like you might look at the and even 11 like basically Joyce would be like seeing that firsthand as like basically even through all that progression like proper remaining tight with like the scenario that I'm looking then I was like Brenner leaving from that night and basically cutting back out of like Brenner's energy laboratory while like and Brenner deciding to like do the rest of the interrogation for like the next day while at that point like Brenner will be like assigning his like men to like stand guard while like stand guard or like they would be like locking the door to the interrogation room behind and basically they are like there will be CCTV and, in that room and basically open and Joyce would be like remaining there in like the side of it like the scenario that I'm doing. Yet like I'm looking like of using his like skills like basically free himself from his like side of it and quickly freeing Joyce and like straight away like the people wandering on the CCTV will be seeing that and get like I'm looking like proper and Joyce like quickly running and I'm looking proper by now like Hopper will be knowing like the exact location but within like Renaissance of the laboratory where the gate is like I'm like proper like still using a skill like basically fighting his way into that, making it to that gate room, just like the scenario that I'm looking along with like Joyce. And those are like them entering that through that gate, and by the time they will be making it to that gate, numbers reporting that Brian's men would be like would have caught up to them and would be like would have taken out their weapons and basically would be like most likely telling at that point that Pop Joyce as well as like Hopper like surrender. So like at that point I was like Hopper turning back towards them and basically Hopper with like a smile and like basically like entering like the gate is like the scenario that I was expecting. So like that way Hopper and Joyce like entering into like the battle world like the from within like Brenner's energy laboratories like the scenario that I was expecting. While right now with like Nancy like so badly wanting to like get revenge and take the life of the monster for taking the light out of Barbara, which like Nancy would be willing. Yeah, like I'm still thinking about the impression that it would be like the Barry version of uh, Barbara that might have died. Like the actual Barbara would still be alive, definitely when the so, but yeah, definitely I'm looking like definitely John and as well as like Nancy. This very night itself, like I'm looking next them and like totally going up to like Buckwood Falls, where like the monster had been where they had seen that monster and basically they are like ambassador like from a different race like ambassador like they would be like totally patiently like Nancy would be like sort of afraid to like basically find that monster and take it like but like ambassador like why they would be like actually like standing near to like something near that area within specific area within the forest where like that they had seen like the monster like kind of looking at like the monster will be like the one would forest will be huge and like monster will be like appearing from like another tree through the portal from another tree. It's like the scenario that I'm that way like Jonathan and Nancy getting caught off guard by like the monster, like the scenario that I'm remembering, and that monster attacking Nancy is like the scenario that I'm remembering. And at that point, like Jonathan totally desperately trying to like protect Nancy, and like Jonathan like basically trying to like also attack like the monster, like the scenario that I'm remembering. And that point, I was like thinking for like the monster like this time capture like Jonathan and basically that monster like dragging Jonathan and basically through another tree like that monster like creating like the portal. And I was like at that point like Jonathan, maybe both Jonathan as well as Nancy like shockingly seeing or like Jonathan shockingly seeing how the monster is able to like create like the powers of the conservation which like it's like able to like create like the portal and like to free it like able to like pass on to like move on to like the parallel world from the real world like probably Jonathan seeing that as he would be like pulled and dragged by that monster and taken to like the battle world of like the scenario that I was. So like at that point, Nancy would be like kind of injured and like Nancy would be like frantically like won't be able to like stop Jonathan from getting dragged and taken away by the monster. So like at that point, like Nancy totally being like absolutely shocked and Nancy would be like absolutely like frantically searching for like uh any portal within like the tree. So like I'm looking like Nancy in the dark in like Murphy forest like this is searching for searching around all the trees like but not being able to like find any portal and basically Nancy would be like totally feeling as if like just like as if like all hopes are lost, like as if like Nancy would be fearing like the moment of like the monster taking like exactly like Barbara, like the monster taking like Johnson's life as well. So Nancy would be totally fearing that moment and Nancy would be like frantically and desperately searching around like the trees in like the forest or like portal. But like she won't be able to like at that point I was like her not being able to like find any portal and at that point I was feeling like Nancy like screaming and like with that as with desperation and disappointment Nancy like screaming and like full of tears and I was like Nancy frantically losing hope and like as Nancy would be like about to walk away from there like I was driving Nancy seeing like a single in one of the tree like a single pop like about to like close. So like at that point I come to like Nancy and I was thinking that tree would be like once again like in that master spot that tree would be like even closer to like the location of like the nothing about the friend or respectively. So like through that tree like that portal will be also closing. So like I'm looking like Nancy quickly just in like the nick of time like Nancy being able to like enter into like the parallel through that portal. Just like right before it closed to like the scenario that I was doing. But like I was thinking by the time like Nancy would be entering into the portal like Nancy would be all of a sudden like basically Nancy would be like feeling that absolute fear because like it would be like the parallel world like once again Nancy remembering that word that she has seen so earlier like basically the parallel world with its like absolute darkness and basically it's like or emptiness and basically all that feeling like basically. So like Nancy feeling that absolute fear and like Nancy all by herself in like the parallel world like basically would be shouting out Johnson's name and would be searching around and but like by then like John the monster would have taken Johnson and dragged Johnson away at like a deeper deep into like the parallel world. It's like the scenario that I'm exploring. So like yet like I was trying Jonathan being able to like free himself eventually, but still something like by then like I was like even within like the parallel world Nancy and Jonathan will be at like a far away location, distant location, like the scenario that I'm doing. So like Nancy after entering into like the parallel world would be like desperately shouting like Jonathan's name at the scenario that I was repeatedly. Yet like Nancy not being able to like hear any noise of any shout out back of like Jonathan and Nancy will be like losing hope. So like I was doing Nancy all by himself like frantically calling out then Phil's name and like and basically and being able to like wanders through like the puppet pops in like battle word and like Nancy like something all over like the battle word and like Nancy at some point like basically Nancy running into like the monsters like the scenario that I'm referring and like Nancy at that point basically skills starts attempt to like run away and get away from like the frantically and really trying to like Nancy was maybe seeing that monster like maybe like Nancy at that point all by herself like maybe it won't be feeling that courage that she might have had when she was with like Jonathan trying to like fight with the monster that like once like the monster will be at that point I was doing maybe for like the monster to face Nancy and like Nancy's probably trying to like desperately or Nancy already would be badly exhausted and Nancy desperately trying to get away from like the monster. But like at that point all of a sudden like Nancy being pulled to like serpent's hideout place within the building and Nancy at that point would be shocked as to like who it is and that would be when I was trying like Nancy getting like the biggest shock and like the biggest twist with like that person being like precisely Barbara, like the scenario that I'm moving. So like only at that point like Nancy talking realizing that basically Barbara is in fact alive. So like I'm going to like it will be through that interaction at that point that Nancy will be having with like Barbara confused Nancy will be having Barbara that like the possibility of like Nancy at that point realizing that there like this parallel world in that parallel world there are parallel versions of like each of them like basically Nancy is openly finding that out and Nancy is being so finally being so fully relieved that basically the Barbara that had died was like not the actual Barbara but like the parallel version of Barbara like Nancy finding that out at that point it's like the scenario that I was doing and then like I was doing Nancy will be getting that hope and that confidence and that moral boost and like Nancy as well as like Barbara like basically forming that absolute team and basically through their interaction like basically like Barbara eventually finding out that basically that like Nancy right now has like a crush on like Jonathan and all that like basically and them both like their absolute teamwork like them both like searching for like Jonathan it's like the scenario that I'm looking for while at the same time in the case of like Mike, Lucas, Justin, and Eleven, I'm deliberating like they would be staying at like this home by themselves. But like I'm looking the scenario to be like the monster, like I'm looking like the monster and it would be either that very night or like the next night that I'm preparing like the monster to like show up and at that time like the monster one would be showing up in like the real world in like the forest behind the forest behind like his home where like CastleByers is like in that forest like the monster like through one of the tree like the monster creating like the portal is showing up. So like I'm just like the scenario to be if that if this very night like if that monster shows up in that forest behind Will's home, then I'm afraid like it will be at that point like the revelation possibly happening that like there's more than one monster. That's like one possibility that I'm looking or like the other possibility that I'm looking is for like maybe for like my Lucas question as well as like 11 to like wait a whole day and maybe by next night like I was like by the time it will be next night almost around like 8 o'clock like I was like the very same monster one thing I'm returning back to like the real world but like that time like it would be like uh, the very next night it would be like returning to the real world through like the forest behind like Will's home. It's like the other possible scenario that I was looking. So it could be like one of these two possibilities that I'm looking. So like at that point, like when the monster comes out from one of the trees in like the forest behind like Will's home where like Mike Richards and Dustin and 11 would be. So like at that point itself like 11 losing 11's powers like would be like quickly sent when like the monster is like nearby. So like 11 totally sensing it and 11 totally like getting seriously scared and 11 totally telling Mike Lucas and Dustin about like the monster being nearby. And so like I was thinking like Mike Lucas and Dustin like stealthily like steadily peeking out of like little phones. So like on the like them will be seeing like the monster from like the far nearby. So like that being like the point where like Mike Lucas and Dustin will be seeing the monster for like first time. This is like the scenario that I'm also totally correct. And then like I'm also like by then like they would have heard of like everything like the when the, during the time like Nancy and Jonathan and all of them Microsoft and all of them are together like they would have heard of like how like the monster like creates all this like awful through Jonathan's system through Nancy and Jonathan's definitely when the camera. So at that point, like I'm also saying, like most likely my data center instance will be the only thing that that sense. Like even though I'm considering like Dustin would be seriously afraid of seeing like the master even at from a distance, like I'm still uh like maybe Lucas and might surely think that this is their chance to like basically to be able for them to be able to like make it to like the parallel world. So like if they follow the monster, they will be able to like once the monster will be like leading to like the parallel world, they will be also be able to like stealthily and throw like the bomb through the parallel world. That way like I'm like Mike totally Mike can maybe Lucas come to such a practical decision and so like both Dustin as well as Eleven will be so extremely afraid, but still 11 like totally due to like 11 at that point like desperately And especially with like 11 having seen like the dead body of Barbara. Maybe even at that point, 11 would be the only thing that would be like uh, the actual rose Barbara might have died. So like I would like 11 would be also feeling that absolute guilt that like 11 could have helped better for like Mike and the other things. 11 had done that like 11 could have saved Barbara to be along the lines of like possibly maybe like even a guilt that 11 might be feeling at that point that like 11 only, even though 11 would be extremely afraid, like 11 still trying to hold on to what left of like the courage that 11 would be having to like basically 11 that way pushing herself to like basically to help Mike Lucas and stuff that out and basically they're all like stealthily following like the monster in like the forest and basically and I was like the tree from and I was like the monster to have like sort of from one of the trees in like the forest behind Will's home and like the monster and the thing then like leading back into like the parallel world through CastleByers like in like the real world is like the scenario that I'm looking. So that's like the scenario that I'm looking. So like Mike Lucas so like my good mentions that like initially Mike Lucas might be thinking of like the that like the most of might be checking out Castle Buyers and would be like uh, leaving out of like Castle Buyers like no, by not finding anything would be along the lines like Mike Lucas and Dustin as they would be like from a distance would be spying like the monster like would be probably thinking but like them realizing maybe alone telling them that basically the monster has created like the portal and basically or like them stop realizing that basically so like the monster might have created like the portal on Castle Fire. So since like the last time they would have contacted Will like since like Will was like since like the last time even at that point like they might not be contacting Will again after that like the scenario that I was so like so such a scenario then like my brother mentioned the Mike Lucas and Dustin shockingly think that basically and Eleven shockingly thinks that like the last time they contacted Will was in like the other side in like the parallel world in Castle Buyers. So like I'm the like them only stupidly rushing towards like the Castle Buyers and them within Castle Buyers seeing the portal they are like I'm going quickly like Mike Lucas and Dustin and 11 like only enter through the portal and I'm the to give through Castle Buyers that I'm the like Mike Lucas, Dustin and 11 will be entering from like the real world to like the parallel world is like the scenario that I'm describing. So like once they will be like entering like the capital buyers that way, for the possible ones they will be like entering the capital buyers in like the parallel worlds. Like at that point, like themselves only finding like will not there within capital buyers. So like at that point, like themselves only realizing the monster has captured and taken will as they have feared, like it's like the scenario that I'm describing. So like from that point on, like might look up sustain as well as like 11's like journey in like the parallel world, beginning in such a manner for their also to like find and save Will. So it's like the scenario that I'm looking. So like this much is definitely my mention. So like these three in such a manner, like these three searches for like Will and Barbara happening by the team of like Popper as well as like Joyce and like the team of like and like Nancy all by herself something for and like Jonathan and eventually running into like talking they're running into like the actual Barbara in like the parallel world and like the team of like Mike Lucas and Dustin as well as like 11 who like Castle Bias like them entering like the parallel world and then dropping for Will in like the parallel world like they're just beginning in such a manner. So it's just like eventual scenario that I'm looking right now in my memory about. And my secondary questions that I believe towards like the end of that journey that I'm looking for in like the team of like Mike, Lucas, and Dustin and 11 like eventually finding Will. And I'm looking like the team of like Nancy and Barbara like and I'm also looking like the team of like Nancy and Barbara them not being able to like find Jonathan. So like I'm looking like then instead of like I'm looking like Jonathan will be most likely found by most likely the team of like Joyce as well as Tom in like battle, but it's like the scenario that end up that way like Jonathan like Hopper and like Joyce like being together while Nancy as well as Barbara will be alone together. Uh, the team of like Nancy and Barbara. Then like the team of like finally like Will would be like back to the crew, back to the squad, back to the team of like Mike Lucas and that Will would be back and Will would be saved that way. Yet, like I'm looking, they would all be like still trapped in like the barrel or just like the scenario that I'm saying. Could be like even then like I'm looking, and then I'm looking like after that they would all and I was after that like eventually them all finding each other and them all the team of Popper and like the team of like Barbara and Nancy, and like the team of like uh, Mike, Joseph, Justin, Will, and 11, like all of them like fighting each other. And then like the biggest task would be for them to like for them to be able to like escape from like the battle world and to be able to like head back into the real world. It's like the scenario that would be their biggest task, especially when we bring this. Especially because like even in Hopper's case, like even the Hopper would be badly wanting to like to put an end to all this by taking the life of that monster. Still, my primary impressions were like even way bigger priority for Hopper would be to like basically to get all of them, like all the kids as well as like Joyce and Nancy Johnson, like all of them back into like the real world safely, to get them safely back into the real world so that like Hopper himself could like basically could form like a special team and basically could like only and bring down like the monster would be like along the lines of everything. So like the highest priority for Hopper at that point would be to like get escape from like the battle world, to get all of them to like safety into like the real world, back into like the real world. So like that would be like a seriously extremely difficult task, like the scenario that it was in. So like I was like the scenario to be like unlike how without much extreme difficulties which like the comparing to the or like maybe compare to the difficulty which through which like eventually Hopper and all of them would be like eventually infiltrating into like the battle world like comparing like the difficulty would be way more even higher for them to escape from like the battle world to like the real world back is like the scenario that I was doing. So like that was going to be like a huge struggle for them. Even after like they would all be like fighting everyone and basically would be joined together like still for them to like escape from like the bad world and make it back to like the real world. That's when was going to be like an extremely serious difficulty of like a task is like the scenario that I'm looking for. And I'm definitely putting like the initial scenario to be like even before they will be able to like make it back to like the real world, like what like them being confronted by like some monsters like the scenario that I'm looking. So like I'm wondering like the monster attacking all of them, and that was really maybe by the like multiple monsters even showing up. It's almost like about that and whispering. And while like things would be like totally looking hopeless for all of them, like that would be the point when I was like Brenner and his team would have like as part of like Brenner like maybe for like Brenner to like get back 11 and like Brenner forming a team and like Brenner himself along with like a team like his team of like skilled forces like basically entering through the gate to like the battle world of definitely my good impression. So to get 11 back by then like maybe it's like Brenner figuring out that 11 is in like the battle world. It's also like a possibility that I'm looking at. So like I'm looking when things would be totally looking hopeless for like Hopper and all of them like I'm looking at that point would be when going suddenly like Brenner and his team would be showing up and like I'm looking like Brenner and his team wanting to like not take the life of the monster but like them trying to catch up the monster like Brenner might want to like do experiments and maybe even study like the monster. It's also like a possibility that I'm looking so like Brenner orange is meant to like capture that monster alive and I'm looking like while code fight would be happening like I'm also putting like due to like Purana interfering like I'm also like copper and others being saved that way as a side effect like and I'm also putting like it could be at that point that I'm putting like the monster is most likely taking the monster itself I'm also would be taking Purana's like it's like the scenario that I'm looking at that point and I'm also putting like it would be after that like the security forces would be like probably struggling Purana's team security forces like would be probably struggling to bring down like the monster and at that point I was like with like some sort of like an ultimate strategy like Copper and probably Jonathan and Nancy like and all of them with that absolute aim of setting up some sort of like an ultimate trap and possibly with that like them finally bringing down and taking the life of the monster like the possibility that I was 11 as well will probably getting out in that and with that like final trap or like attempt that they will be like taking out and taking the life of like the monster like the scenario that unfolds and then all of them like successfully returning back into like the real world and then like all of them like successfully returning back into like the real world through like the portal or the gate within like Piranha's energy laboratories like the scenario that I'm looking at. So like with like Piranha Zone like I'm looking at like Hopper would be like and they would like having like absolutely nothing to fear and then totally entering back to the real world through Piranha's energy laboratory and then like totally marching out of Piranha's energy laboratory and then like considering like Piranha's energy laboratory that way being shut down for good like the scenario that I told you and like Piranha's remaining team members like being brought to like justice and one is just like given the scenario that I'm going to roll in break. And then the people think it was being only at that point that 11 will be finally be able to like reunite with her like mother. Jane finally that way being able to that 11 of Jane finally being able to like reunite with her mother. And then both pretending that to be like basically the realize that they would be like acting differently from like the real from how the real was like acting that entire whole past years like the scenario that happened and the real not like they decorating the like entire home that very day that 11 would be like showing up but that very day that Popper would be bringing along with like Mike Lucas and Dustin and all of them like would be like bringing 11 to the real home like at that day like they will be certainly seeing like in Terrier's home, like Charlie being decorated was like they board in front of like Terrier's home or like home house itself. That they will be saying that welcome back, Jane. Like it's like the scenario that I'm positing that, and them all being talked, and even Terrier's sister at that point seeing Jane, like Terrier's sister as well, like they like to never refuse, totally refused to like believe Terrier all of them being totally stopped. And Terria is straight away acting normal and basically like straight away like recognizing 11 and basically straight away like basically carefully hugging Jane's like the scenario that I'm going to protect and finally that way 11 or Jane finally being reunited with her mother is like the scenario that I'm looking and at that point shockingly them all realizing that them all shockingly together realizing that like maybe even through careers herself that like this entire time that she had like the power of like and through like the experiments when she was in that was she had went through when she was in like ultra in like Kristen Park like she had basically gained in that future sight ability so like she had already seen this like future and she was this entire time she was waiting patiently waiting for this state like basically revealing that at that point in front of like an extremely shocked entirety of like Hopper and Mike Lucas and Dustin and all of them like and 11 and all of them like even Taria's sister and all of them like Joyce and all of them like being thoroughly shocked when Taria finally will be making that reveal like being the one scenario that I'm about to remember. Okay, so the data of reimbursement right now was like the monster right now finding who are built in CastleByers like and for like my preference is that for like right now itself like the monster to like find be able to like find Bill. It won't be like my preference then certainly won't be because of like Bill was like at that point like singing the like favorite song the like the sound of Bill singing drawing like the monster's attention and bringing it towards towards finding Bill in next CastleByers that definitely won't be the case, especially when neither would it just be like a coincidence that like the monster had found Will in Castle Bios exactly at that point. Stephanie Member it won't be neither a coincidence either. Stephanie Member the precise reason would be exactly because when 11 had like first because like my cultural impressions were like when 11 had first used the sensory deprivation tank back in like run up the laboratory. Even then like basically for like the monster to basically find 11 even before 11 knew about like the monster. That would be the best would be to like I'm sitting to my presentation precisely because of like the monster being like the parallel version of 11 uh, um, and like the parallel version of run-ups like experiment going wrong like in causing like 11 to be get the parallel version of 11 to get transformed into this monster while the parallel version of 11 might have gotten transformed into this monster like still this monster will be having like even superior powers to like the real world 11 is definitely my impression so this so those that superior powers like whenever like 11 would be entering like the dark void through like the whole sensory deprivation tank itself like I'm just wondering like each of those time like the monster would be able to like stealthily watch and see what like 11 is doing in like the dark void is definitely one of the records. So like just now since like 11 had entered into through the sensory deprivation like 11 had just now from the home had entered into like the dark void once again and basically had found Castle Buyers and found Will within like Castle Buyers and this will be like precise and exact reason because like when 11 had seen and found Will within like Castle Buyers while 11 was searching for Will like and the friend like And multiple embraces are like for like the monster and documenting the monster for like the monster won't be that having that much of like a consciousness or anything. It's simply multiple embracing. Yet like it will be have superior powers which will, might be enabling like the monster to be able to like see everything like the real world 11 will be seeing through like the DarkVoid is definitely my way of origin. So like when 11 had basically searched for like the monster won't be able to like to actually having like the power or like will be conscious enough to be able to like actually search for to use like the DarkVoid to like actually search for Will. But like I'm from like that would be only possible for like 11. But like I was since like 11 searched for Will just now in like the DarkVoid and had basically that search led 11 to find CastleByers within the DarkVoid and into finding Will within the CastleByers in like the DarkVoid. Like at that point, like I was saying, all that 11 had seen within the DarkVoid, like basically the monster might have been stealth, might have also been stealthy, might have observing and might have been able to see that or that definitely remember the region. So that might have been how like the monster might have found out that like basically Will is actually hiding in like Captain Bias and that would be the reason for like without much after for like right now even after like not much great delay after like 11 had found Will in like the DarkVoid in that Captain Bias hiding within Captain Bias itself like without much great delay at all like the monster right now in like the parallel world like already having found showed up to Cattle Buyers and having found like very within hiding within Cattle Buyers won't be a coincidence at all and would be precisely because of like this exact reason it's certainly my personal theory and position right now. So like basically in short, like when it comes to impressions that like through the sensory deprivation time, like basically everything that element sees in like the DarkVoid, like the monster would also be able to see. It's definitely my personal theory and position right now. And I'm considering that Mike Lucas and Justin 11 only realizing and figuring out about this only in like eventual possible maybe distant future, like eventual scenario that I'm looking on the thing and my personal impression.